Hey, DawgNation, my name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Running a little bit late today. That is on me. We are glad to have you with us nonetheless. Hopefully you're enjoying, at least those of you who are teachers, you got kids, something like that, maybe that sort of Friday of spring break. For those of you who just a regular work day, thanks for squeezing us in and making that a part of that too. We're going to have some fun today, and we're going to have some fun at Florida coach Dan Mullen's expense, which is always my favorite thing in the world to do. Jeff Sintel going to be here for a little recruiting talk as well. We're going to set up what is a really big weekend for UGA athletics beyond just football. We'll talk a bit about that on today's show as well, and generally speaking, get the weekend started on a high note. So glad to have you with us as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Days like this as a Georgia fan make me like my coach so much more. I tell you what, sometimes the side-by-side comparison between Kirby Smart, some of his rivals, really makes Kirby look good and really makes some of those other guys kind of look not so good, and especially in this case, Florida coach Dan Mullen. By now, many of you have maybe seen some of the stuff that Mullen has said. I know there's a piece up on it at DawgNation.com as well, and you better believe around here, we believe that good Georgia fans are Gator haters, and we love it when the Gators are easy to hate, and Dan Mullen certainly is easy to, at least in a sporting sense, hate right now. So let me kind of dive into this and make what I think is an obvious point where Kirby's a big winner. Dan Mullen comes across like a really big loser on this, a bigger loser than he normally comes across, I guess. So here is the backstory and kind of how we get to where we are today. You probably saw earlier this week that Georgia has announced more big non-conference series. Previously announced a home-and-home return against Clemson. That's exciting for dog fans of a certain age like myself who grew up in the 80s. Texas going to Austin. Who wouldn't want to do that? You add to that what's already in the books for Georgia, like UCLA and things of that nature. And then you had another series with Clemson added this week, and then also a chance for Georgia to go to Florida State. Now, all these things are like way into the future, 10 years or so into the future, deep into the future for most of these series. But nonetheless, they are on the books and they are scheduled. And it's a chance for this week, and kind of from a national college football standpoint, what is kind of not really that heavy of a news cycle, not a ton going on in the national world of college football, for Georgia to do what it does this week, even when you're looking way into the future for most of these games we play. When Georgia does what it does give Georgia a chance to dominate that news cycle. It gives Georgia a chance to get what a lot of college football programs can't earn for themselves. National attention, national praise. Georgia got some of that. Because let's face it, this is one of the things that fans, media, and for the most part, anyone who cares about college football, other than sometimes the coaches who play the games, everybody just wants better games. Everybody just wants better scheduling, more fun, cross-regional matchups, more of that kind of stuff. And as it stands right now, Georgia's kind of leading the way in doing that. Because remember, in most of these years coming up where Georgia is going to be playing one of these non-conference series, with Georgia Tech presumably still on the schedule, you're going to have like 3 Power 5 non-conference opponents every single year to go along with whatever Georgia's playing in the SEC as well, at least as it's currently scheduled right now. That means in some cases it's like Texas and Clemson in the same month, or, Florida State and Texas in the same years, so different things like that. It's going to be just an overwhelming number of big-time non-conference games. And as Kirby Smart explained this week, when it comes to his scheduling philosophy, assuming that he's still here then, and as of right now, there's no reason to think that he won't be, but from Kirby Smart's standpoint, there is a very specific reason why Georgia wants to lead the way in scheduling like this, and here is how Georgia coach Kirby Smart explained that earlier this week.
I'm thinking that to get in the playoffs as the future goes, I don't know whether they'll ever expand it. That's not for me to even kind of divulge on. But I do think that you're going to need a quality of schedule to do that. I think that there's going to be 2 lost teams in the future if they've got a really tough schedule that'll be able to make that. I also think at the University of Georgia, you should be able to recruit the finest, best players in the country out of your own state and across the country, because our academic institution is so highly thought of. So I want to have the best players. I want to play the best teams. Kids come to college to play big games. They don't come to play I would never name anybody, but they don't come to play anybody, the Sisters of the Poor. They want to play the best teams. So we want to go schedule the best teams. Unfortunately, you can't schedule these games but 7 to 10 years out. And that's so frustrating to me because I can't think about 7 to 10 years out. I'm trying to think about tomorrow and this year, and you're having to schedule way in advance. But we thought 3 Power 5 opponents, non-conference, would be not groundbreaking, but we thought it would be a new thing, and we're not afraid of that. I'm not afraid to go out and play. I mean, you look at the NFL teams, and I know those are different players, but they play 16 teams in a season that are all good. There's no cupcake in the NFL. They play back-to-back-to-back quality opponents, and we want our fan base to get that. We also want our fan base to get potentially what might be 7 consecutive home games, non-conference Power 5 opponent. And we're trying to get that lined up for them and play some good rivalries. I think it's going to help us in recruiting. I always do. And I like playing in Atlanta as well.
Now, I know that's a little bit longer audio clip than we would typically play on the show, but the reason why I play the full clip of Kirby there is because it's good. I mean, how do you not leave that statement from Kirby as a Georgia fan saying, I like my coach? I like the fact that he says we're not afraid to play these kinds of games. We're not afraid to play Florida State. We're not afraid to play Clemson. We want to play Clemson. We're not afraid to play Notre Dame. We're not afraid to play Texas. All these games are going on. Georgia says we're not afraid to do these kinds of things. And I think that from a just football fan standpoint, when your coach says that, there's that's kind of what you want to hear from your coach. But there is also, I think, something else really interesting going on here. I think there's a cool strategy at play here. And Kirby Smart doesn't say this out loud. There's a chance he's not thinking what I'm thinking on this. But strategically, it does make sense for Georgia, assuming it's going to be able to keep on recruiting at the pace that it's recruiting right now. It's smart for Georgia to want schedules to be tougher. Because if you've got the best players, then you will benefit the most from a tough schedule. The teams that benefit from weaker schedules are teams that don't have overwhelming talent advantages over their opponent. If that be the case, then you want, you want easier schedules because it makes it easier for you to hopefully put together a good record. Think about some of these Big Ten West teams that have had good records in recent years. They play for the most part weak schedules to get there, yet they're 11-1 at the end of the year or late in the season undefeated, saying, we belong in the discussion of being the best. They benefit from the schedules that they play. But if you can force everybody to play, big-time conference schedules and, 3 really good non-conference opponents, then at that point in time, the balance of power shifts dramatically back in favor of the teams who have the talent and the depth to win week after week, playing, as Kirby Smart said, a schedule like an NFL team would play. So it's fun for fans, but it's also a strategic advantage for the teams with the most talent, which brings us to another program that's apparently thinking in a very different manner. Credit to the local media in Gainesville, Florida yesterday that asked Florida coach Dan Mullen, hey, did you see what Georgia just did? They just added Florida State and Clemson to go along with the SEC schedule they're already playing. They're playing, they didn't mention this out loud, the reporter, but playing Notre Dame this year. Did you see all this? Did you see what Georgia's doing? And listen to Dan Mullen, the Florida coach, start to backpedal here. This is Weasley from old Dan, but you'll like it as a Georgia fan. Here it is.
We play Florida State, so people are trying to catch up to us with how tough our schedule is. To be honest with you, I mean, we play Florida State every year, right? I mean, people made big. I guess if Georgia's playing them, they're trying to catch up to us, I guess, and toughen their schedule because we play one of the toughest schedules. I think, boy, you'd be hard pressed to find somebody non-conference next year. We're playing Miami and Florida State.
I just mean long term. Would you like a home and home? Like they're maybe looking at Oklahoma. That's a report. I don't know if it's true. Would you like to get something?
Well, like I said, we already have that with Florida State.
Okay.
I think that's one thing that probably gets looked down upon. Would it be better to drop Florida State and schedule Oklahoma? That probably wouldn't go over so well. So already have that in scheduling. Scott and I talk about it. We play in the Southeastern Conference, so we're already playing one of the toughest schedules in the country.
Oh, listen, I hope that Dan Mullen never changes. I hope he stays Florida coach for the rest of my life. I hope he stays there saying things like that, doing things like that. The current state of the world's largest outdoor cocktail party rivalry could not be better. You got Kirby Smart saying, bring on the toughest opponents we can play. Bring on Texas and Clemson the same season. Let's add Florida State. Let's do some more stuff with Clemson. Let's play Notre Dame in 2019. Let's do all of that. And you've got Dan Mullen saying, but we already play Florida State, and we're playing Miami this year. Nobody plays a tougher non-conference schedule than us. Miami's got a first-year coach. Florida State's the dregs right now. It's the worst state that program's been in decades. He seems to either be willfully ignorant of or just ignoring the fact that Georgia's playing Georgia Tech this year, which really, right now, Georgia Tech and Florida State aren't that different as programs, unfortunately. And Georgia's going to play a preseason top 10 Notre Dame team. But nonetheless, Dan Mullen knows what he's doing here. He's gaslighting on all of this. He's pretending one thing's true when something else is true. But ultimately, what's going to end up happening here is not so much this is going to hurt him in his rivalry with Georgia. Kirby Smart and the talent that Kirby Smart's recruiting is going to do plenty to hurt Mullen in that regard. But when Mullen brags about playing Miami finally, which Florida doesn't do enough, and Florida State every year, and right now Florida State's not very good, it's his own fans he's going to hurt himself with. Because as he says there, hey, listen, I'm talking to my athletic director, Scott Strickland, about this. We're working on some scheduling stuff. Well, I was able to get a little bit more insight into some of the scheduling stuff that Florida might be working on. There's a guy named Pat Dooley who writes for the Gainesville Sun, has covered Florida for a very long time, and he went into some detail in a recent podcast about exactly the kind of scheduling stuff Florida might be looking to do. And if you're a Georgia fan, once again, you'll find this interesting because it doesn't seem like Dan Mullen quite as courageous as Kirby Smart when it comes to non-conference scheduling. Here's Pat Dooley on Dan Mullen.
But what's interesting to me is that Florida State and Georgia have committed to play in 2027 and 2028, and I'm sensing, and I've talked to Scott about this. Scott has been trying like heck to book some Power 5 teams. They want to do some home and homes with them. Power 5 teams, not alleged national champions.
So not Oklahoma then, and not Clemson then, which would be a non-conference game for Georgia. Not that kind of stuff. In the same conversation, Pat Dooley goes on to say it's maybe a team like a Kansas State or maybe a team like a Boston College. Listen, this comparison could not be more clear. Right now, Kirby Smart looks like a very brave coach willing to take on all comers, and Dan Mullen looks like a coach cowering in the corner making excuses for why his team does not want to schedule up. And in the long term, the big winner, both in terms of national perception and perception from its own fan base, in this case, I believe is going to be Kirby Smart. All right, I am running way late here, so let me pick up the pace here. It's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us. Live on video today, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. And we are available as a podcast, the Apple Podcast Player, the Google Podcast Player, the world-famous DawgNation.com. We got Jeff Sintel coming up with some recruiting talk in just a moment. We'll also go around the doghouse here, presented today by our friends at Merriweather and Tharp. Great to have them as a part of DawgNation Daily. And I apologize for going long off the top on the Dan Mullen thing, but how can you not get a little fired up when Mullen essentially lies, certainly exaggerates the truth as a way of making it sound like his schedule's the toughest non-conference schedule in the country, and Georgia's just trying to catch up with us. Listen, Georgia hasn't been trying to catch up with Florida since, 888 days ago? Pretty much ever since then, Georgia has been on a plane and a trajectory that those lousy, stinking Gators can only dream of. Yeah, there you go. We'll do it again later in the show. But 888 days, that's how long it's been since Georgia has beaten Florida. All right, so as I said, I don't have a ton of time here for our Around the Doghouse, but I do want to try to squeeze in one thing, because if you get a chance, I want you to go to DawgNation.com, as I like to call it, the world-famous DawgNation.com. Really good piece up on Jamari Salyer, a guy that we've talked about a good bit here on DawgNation Daily a bit. You may remember it wasn't that long ago, a few days ago, that Kirby Smart said when it comes to offensive linemen, the most improved offensive lineman on our roster right now is Jamari Salyer. That's a guy that's night and day different from where he was a year ago, and boy, that got some attention. And then Kirby kind of puts his money where his mouth is beyond that. You saw Salyer working some in a first-team situation as a first-team right guard when the media was viewing practice the other day. He's also worked around a bit at tackle, according to Smart. We'll hear from Salyer in his own words on that in just a moment. But pretty clearly it seems that Salyer, a five-star offensive line signing from the class of 2018, a guy that Jeff Sintel says may be the best interior offensive line prospect he's ever seen, we didn't get a chance to see a ton of that on the field from Salyer in his first year. Really, two other freshmen, Trey Hill and Cade Mays, played more a year ago than Salyer did. But 2019 might be the year that Salyer comes into his own. He spoke to the media about a number of subjects yesterday. The patience that he's shown, the fact that he didn't get what Mays and Hill got a year ago, a chance to go through spring practice and be a part of the first G-Day. He talked a lot about that yesterday and what kind of right now this spring has been a coming out party for Salyer. Here's a taste of what you can get more of both at DawgNation.com and the DawgNation video channels with Jamari Salyer.
I mean, I'm just working every day to get better. That's been my whole MO since I got here. It's never been like, I just want to beat that guy. Like, I just want to get better for me and maximize my potential. I think since I've been here, I've probably played about every position. Definitely in practice, but I've been all over the place. But mostly this spring, I've been on the right side and center. So.
Retrospectively, do you think not being able to come here that spring put you behind a little bit, and that's why you're getting where you are now?
I mean, everybody wishes they had a spring ball as a freshman. I mean, I think that's like the biggest advantage you could have. But I mean, I'm not salty about it. I'm not down about it. I mean, Pace Academy was great for me, and they told me I couldn't come early, so I just went along with it. I enjoyed my second semester of my senior year, and I just went along with it. So I'm not salty about it. I'm just taking it as it comes.
I love that attitude from Salyer. I think that's what he's going to use to his benefit as he works his way, maybe on the field as, if not a starter, certainly a major contributor and major part of the depth for Georgia's offensive line. But let's not give up on the idea that Salyer may be able to unseat one of those expected starters and become a part of that first five there himself. I made the comparison at DawgNation.com on Sunday between Salyer and what happened with Isaiah Wilson last year when he used, for him in 2017, it was a redshirt year, to work his way up to freshman All-American status as a redshirt freshman a year ago. Salyer's not a redshirt. He did play enough last year to qualify, but he could be following a similar path to Wilson, and the deepest offensive line arguably in the country may have another very, very compelling piece in Salyer, and that is certainly a lot of fun to think about that. It's Around the Doghouse. It's presented by Meriwether and Tharp here today on DawgNation Daily. We want to keep the fun rolling on right now. A lot of UGA recruiting talk to get into. The guy that I mentioned a moment ago is our recruiting insider, Jeff Sintel. He's got good thoughts on a number of subjects, so let's welcome him into the program right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We'll say hello to Jeff Sintel on this Friday. Always a fun conversation with Mr. Sintel. And, Jeff, before we get into the recruiting news of the day, I was just talking about a guy that you know well, Jamari Salyer, who met with the media for a moment yesterday. And I think we've seen a cool thing the last couple of years where, a lot of these guys have had to come in, forced to be a little patient early. In Salyer's case, that was certainly true last year when he saw two freshman offensive linemen who were, as recruits rated lower than him, have better freshman seasons than Salyer did, get more playing time. And yet you hear him yesterday say, I'm not salty about all of this. I'm just going to keep working and play whatever position they tell me to play. And it certainly seems like that attitude is working well for Salyer right now, right?
Yeah, I think that's the thing fans should kind of grow accustomed to. Number one, it's the quality, depth, and competition. Much has been said that maybe Georgia's second-team offensive line could be the starting line for about everybody outside of the Alabama category in the SEC. I got to remember with these kids, as much as we as we talk about their recruiting and how heavily they're recruited for Georgia, the way that Jamari Salyer looks at this is it's not how good he is in 2018. It's how good he is in 2021. That's when he has his junior season, and then could potentially project into the NFL draft. And Brady, you think about it, he's pushing guys like Ben Cleveland, Isaiah Wilson, Solomon Kinley, Cade Mays.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be someone's, like for instance, that gentleman that's at the SEC school to the south of us, he would be running off his mouth a whole lot more if his offensive line looked like that. And that's not even the first-team elite group at Georgia.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I don't want to make this entire discussion about offensive line, but there is a point that I've made a couple times, Jeff, that I think you'll agree about. So let's say that the starting five offensive line for Georgia is what we thought it was at the start of the preseason. Maybe Hill at center, Kinley and Cleveland are the two starting guards, and Thomas and Wilson are the two starting tackles. Look what you have as your next two guys beyond that. Between Cade Mays and Jamari Salyer, there is a chance, Mays can play both tackle spots and probably both guard spots. Salyer can play both guard spots. He can play right tackle according to Kirby, and he would be a center. You potentially have two guys that between the two of them could cover all 5 offensive line spots at an all-SEC potential level. To have, sort of the left side, Swiss Army knife, Cade Mays, the right side of the offensive line, Swiss Army knife, and Jamari Salyer. That's an insane level of versatility from your next 2 offensive linemen, assuming that Salyer and Mays don't work their way into the starting lineup before the season begins.
Yeah, and it makes your top 5 feel more like the top 8 or top 9 because they can get to different spots. And here's one for you, Brandon. It's been well documented how Georgia sometimes struggled in short yardage and in goal line situations. What about after the end of a physical, smash mouth, run it down their throats drive? What if Sam Pittman just takes a tap to the shoulder of Kinley, a tap to the shoulder of Cleveland, and then rolls in Salyer and rolls in Mays to finish off that drive from maybe first and goal at the 3 or 4, where the guys you rotate in, and this is not Nolan Richardson in Arkansas or UNLV basketball, but what it is what if you have guys that, they're big gentlemen, they wear down. What if you can rotate those guys a little bit more with no drop-off where maybe some of those salty defensive tackles are playing 50, 60, 70 plays a game, but yet they're dealing with an elite Georgia lineman that's only playing maybe 40 plays a game. I think that makes a difference in the trenches.
I think you're right about that. I think that's very well said. Let me transition to 2020 recruiting talk. And you and I discussed this briefly as a part of DN90 earlier this week when we were both in Athens. And I wanted to make sure we made this conversation a part of DawgNation Daily as well. The fact that 5-star running back Kendall Milton has made it official. He will be at G-Day. You explained on the video why this is even better news than some might think, just given the nature of the visit. And I hope you'll go into some detail on that. So let me kind of just open-ended start talking about Kendall Milton, and then we'll kind of pick up the conversation there because Jeff, I'm over the moon about this. This is what I wanted to happen. It looks like it's shaping up to happen in kind of the manner that I guess I would have preferred. I just think this is really good news, so I was hoping you'd talk a little bit about it.
Yeah. So I think we did this recently on one of our platforms where we talked about who would be the ideal G-Day visitor. And definitely Milton's name was right at the top because he needs to take his first visit to Georgia. And what better way for him to soak up everything that the Georgia football program has to offer with like a dog walk, with like 75,000 in the stands for a spring game. I mean, that's more than UCLA and USC, some of his hometown teams out there in California. That's more than those schools get for a big Pac-12 conference game. So you see the ability for Georgia to put its best foot forward there with Kendall Milton, and it also offers up some avenues here. It's the avenue where he sees a spring game at Georgia, where he doesn't see a spring game at Oklahoma per se. He doesn't see a spring game at Alabama per se, and yet he also offers the ability, with him being in Alabama on the 17th, is it offers up the ability for him to spend multiple days at Georgia as well. Not just that one-day barnstorming visit, that someone I talk to a lot in frequency brings up a lot. But this is a kick your feet up, put your feet on the table, kick back and chillax, maybe watch a Netflix or something like that, maybe walk the friendly confines of downtown Athens during a lovely spring day. I mean, lots of possibilities there for Kendall Milton to get kind of cozy with Georgia.
So you've spent some time with Milton, and, based on what I've read from you about him, he seems like a very smart, thoughtful guy, and I'm curious, given your interactions with him and your interpretation of his thought process, when he's in Athens for that time, specifically on April 20th for G-Day, is he going to be watching what happens between the lines more of how are they using running backs? And now I know the spring game's not the same thing as a real game, but put that aside for a moment. Or is he going to be wanting to soak up the atmosphere and saying, hey, could I see myself being a part of this university community? Which of those two things, given your interactions with him, are going to be more important on that particular weekend? The business part of what's happening between the white lines, or the more touchy-feely part of what does it feel like to be between the hedges?
I think it's kind of layered there, Brandon. I think both of those work hand in hand, and I think they can work in Georgia's favor. I think the real thing for him to see, especially given, Zamir White's still going to be on the DL, and you're still going to see limited a little bit with DeAndre Swift. They also want to protect the bell cow right there at running back. So especially with the red and black format, can you imagine Kendall Milton looking down on that game and seeing, okay, there's Harrion on that side, there's Swift on that side, there's Cook on this side, and then there's walk on. I mean, yeah, Kenny McIntosh is on the way. He knows that. But you see a lot of open competition there for Georgia in the backfield. And that's what he liked about Georgia. He liked the fact that Georgia checked almost every box for him, especially the box where Georgia is a premier program with tradition, with the Gurleys, the Michelles, the Chubbs in the NFL that really like to run the rock. But he also does not see 5 or 6 dudes as well at that position group for the next 2 years, like he could at other schools. And I think that spring day spectacle where, let's say, DeAndre Swift only gets limited touches, and let's see, Zamir White is obviously still not going to be available, and Kenny McIntosh is still not there. Really, the only backs that you can anticipate getting a lot of touches in spring ball for Georgia might be a James Cook, might be a Brian Harrion. And that's got to look pretty good to a recruit coming in, wondering, because this family made this very clear to me. They do expect Kendall to have the ability to come in and play right away as a freshman somewhere.
Yeah.
And for Georgia fans, what if the University of Georgia is actually one of those somewheres?
Yeah, that's good. That's a good thought. Milton joins Keely Ringo, another 5-star prospect who's already made it official that he will be at G-Day there that day. What's the next domino that you're looking, not a prediction of this guy will be here, but curiosities from you in terms of the next dominoes that could fall when it comes to G-Day attendees?
Well, I'm sure you'd love to see 4 or 5 bells go off for Georgia, maybe like potentially the 2 or 3 that could go off for Clemson. There's a lot of the in-state guys to think about there. I see a guy like Zacchaeus Walker is a guy that Georgia has a really good shot at. I'm sure, Brandon, you noticed on the daily phone or the daily news telegraph that came across your phone, Jermaine Burton is going to take an official, I don't think it's an official, but he's going to take a visit to LSU for its spring game this weekend.
Yeah.
I think that's a very interesting thought pattern right there. But, I do still think it's going to come time sooner rather than later when a 2021 prospect shows up. I mean, this is the longest it's been in the Kirby Smart era where the Bulldogs have not worked 1 year ahead with at least one kind of initial recruit in a initial public recruit in a class going forward ahead of the current class. You see things like some of the things coming out around Tate Ratledge. Tate Ratledge is a guy that I think doesn't want to take this a long way with his decision much longer, and it does seem that Georgia and Tennessee are the ones that are very clear in Tate Ratledge's mind as well. Usually, sometimes things like G-Day are the things that kind of put a school over in a prospect's mind, especially what a Georgia G-Day looks like. And maybe, since we were just speaking about running backs, I kind of think back to that first 93 K-Day and how instrumental it was for a lot of Bulldogs, most notably an out-of-state Bulldog like DeAndre Swift.
So you mentioned the Clemson spring game, and I do want to talk about that just for a minute. It is tomorrow, and obviously there's going to be a lot of recruiting stuff going on there, but I'm interested more about what's kind of on the field for a moment because, as I said on yesterday's show, all those, and I'm going to kind of use positions, I guess, somewhat interchangeably here, but all those kind of, defensive front guys from that team this past year are kind of all moving on the NFL, and look what Clemson's going to have on the field tomorrow, guys that could be stepping in that spot. These are names that you and I over the years have talked about in this space from a recruiting standpoint that at one point in time maybe could have gone to Georgia. Guys like Xavier Thomas and Justin Maskell and KJ Henry and all those guys. I mean, pretty clearly, Clemson's done a pretty good job of saying if you want to get after the quarterback, if you want to make tackles for loss in the backfield, if you want to be, to use Kirby's word from this spring, the havoc-wreaking, defensive player, come here and play for Brent Venables and come here and be a part of this defensive front for the Clemson Tigers. And reputationally, that seems to be benefiting Clemson right now with two of the names that we talk about pretty frequently, Miles Murphy and Brian Brzee. I'm not crying over spilt milk. I'm not whining about this. I'm just kind of pointing out, Jeff, based on the conversation we also had on Before the Hedges presented by Kroger on Wednesday. Right now, it seems like that Georgia has some reputational challenges to overcome. I believe that makes Trayvon Walker really important. He's got to come here and be dominant when he gets a chance to be on the field. Some of the other guys, more outside linebacker types, may have to do some of that same kind of stuff so that Georgia can say, we get pass rushers to the NFL the same way that a team like Clemson does, or a team like Alabama does, or even really Ohio State that over the years has been really good at that. Reputationally, Georgia's got to improve in that regard, don't they?
Well, I think you got to remember, Brandon, it's not even 5 years old where Georgia has placed Lorenzo Carter and Lorenzo, Leonard Floyd into the NFL as well. Leonard Floyd, my memory serves, Roquan Smith and Leonard Floyd are the only top 10 draft picks at linebacker over the last 5 or 6 years, where Georgia got an inside backer and an outside backer there. But to speak to your greater point, I'll just call upon some content right now that's on DawgNation.com. That's the great interview with Jamari Salyer. Jamari is always going to be great in front of a mic, in front of a podium, kind of going to represent the program really well in terms of maybe after the not-so-good news of the week where Georgia, I thought it was interesting how Georgia sent some of its best PR or most representative, great ambassadors of the program going forward with guys like Andrew Thomas and guys like Jamari Salyer and Solomon Kinley, guys that will represent the G well. But did you hear that interview, Brandon, those conversations where Jamari was talking about how fast Nakobe Dean is right now and how fast Nolan Smith is right now? And listen, for someone like Jamari to notice defensive guys who he's charged to block as being really, really fast, that's like you at a convention of podcasters saying, you know what, that fella right there, he really likes to talk. He can really move that mouth a little bit. When Jamari says that, you take notice.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And so as you're kind of pointing out, maybe some of the guys in this 2019 roster right now and some of the guys who are on their way arriving this summer, can kind of help evolve that perception of Georgia as a program that does everything well. We've seen the way that obviously running back is thought to be running back university. The offensive line, the way that group has been overhauled since Kirby Smart's been here. What's happening along the defensive front, I think, faces a similar challenge right now. Not because it's not good, it's just not maybe perceived to be as great as some other programs. And if you want to win with the Murphys and the Brzezis and people like that, I think you've got to be able to kind of cast that perception about the program. So we'll see how that goes. Let me talk about something else, Jeff, for a moment. And you're going to tell me this is nothing, and I'm sure you're probably right about that. I have, for the most part, kind of, written off Raheem Jarrett to Tennessee. My assumption is that seems to be where all the chatter points him as of late. He does retweet a tweet from not too long ago of him on the Georgia campus over the last couple of days. It's not a new tweet of a new visit. It's an old retweet from a previous Georgia visit. I'm assuming this is just a false positive, right? And the Jarrett story, for the most part, with Georgia is kind of over. Am I correct for saying that?
Well, never say never. Never say over with these volatile, mercurial personalities and everything else like that. But I'm sure you caught the chatter, the other chatter to pay attention to. Lots of people notice tweets. Pay attention to deleted tweets, because I think there was some delete Twitter crossfire going back in the deleted Twitter category where Mikael Sherman, his teammate, and Raheem Jarrett were talking about, some people think they're a package deal. Some people dismiss the fact that they're a package deal. That's the more accurate statement right there. But there was a tweet he sent out that said, same conference, different divisions, and then there's another tweet from Jermaine Burton sent out where Raheem Jarrett talks about number one team in the country, number one recruiting class in the land. And the one about the same conference, different divisions, I'm sure that one probably caught your eye, because that's speculating that both of them will end up in the Southeastern Conference, but at different divisions of the conference. And, Mikael Sherman is a guy that's trending towards either Georgia or Ohio State in everyone's book. And I would say that the only way those two would both end up in the same conferences would be if a school like LSU or Alabama ends up being the home for Raheem Jarrett.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And sometimes with a lot of the social media stuff, it sort of difficult to tell what is what, but obviously, based on, what I've kind of read from you and, just the general chatter that's out there, it certainly seems like Georgia's in better shape for, a linebacker right now like Sherman than it is for a wide receiver like Jarrett. So you can kind of, it's almost like an algebra equation where you start solving for X. Well, if this is true, then what does it make that be true? And so that'll be an interesting thing to follow along with. And since you brought up Jermaine Burton, I guess I'll ask you a quick question on this. Do you think, as of today, which I believe is April 5th, he is 15 days out from his decision April 20th? Does Jermaine Burton know today what announcement he's going to make on April 20th? I won't even ask you to tell me which of these schools that it is. You mentioned the fact that he's going to LSU. So that spring game is tomorrow as well. I won't even ask you to tell me which school you think he chooses. Does he know today which school he's choosing April 20th?
Here's what I think, Brandon. I think these are maybe affirming visits he has up ahead, and maybe you're gonna see where he goes and where he does not go as an example of the schools that are really in it for him. This is a young man I think that could benefit from having some stability in his career, which means he's going to end up. He wants to sit somewhere and put some roots down and know that I'm going to be with the same team, the same trainers, the same teammates, the same coaches for a while. I think that's what he's looking for, especially given his talent level in this early decision. Far be it for me to ever, place a suggestion box in your wonderful show here at all times, but I think maybe the name you need to turn the heat up on, maybe turn the burner down on Jermaine Burton, and maybe turn the burner up is, I think maybe you need to start thinking and looking at that film and telling folks about that Ringo fell out in Arizona.
Wow.
I know we spend a lot of time on Kendall Milton because running backs are the thing at Georgia, and it is RBU with a lot of really great foundational backup data points to definitely give credence to that. But that Ringo, again, we're going to have a second trip to Georgia. Neither of these are official visits yet. And he's all the way out in Arizona, where he doesn't really have a dominant program, a dominant in-state program is one to watch out for, and everything else. Ringo, sir, might just be a thing for the University of Georgia in the long run, at least to make sure this fan base and this mighty fine audience of ours knows that name.
Quick final thing for you, Jeff. What did you make of Daslin Worsham, the Alabama commit, being on the Georgia campus recently? I think we may have some evidence of Worsham on the UGA campus to show here. Listen, I always like it when Georgia gets in the mix with an Alabama commit. I don't ultimately know where this is going or where this is heading, but it's always fun to me when Georgia gets an Alabama commit on campus. What'd you make of that?
Yeah, Worsham's an interesting guy. He's a really fast guy, but he hasn't really shown up in a lot of the big games. I think he's more potential rather than on-field production. Talented player, don't get me wrong. Obviously, he was committed to Alabama for a reason. But I think he's a player that needs to show another gear to his game to really get folks excited about him as an elite top-level prospect. You see things he has to work on. You see things like in the blocking aspect that already make me wonder about how that would translate to Georgia in ways that I look at the Micaiah Tongue film and I look at the Dominic Blaylock film, and I know that those guys will be just fine at that for Georgia. I think maybe, on the recruiting front, and this is the immediate type guys, I thought it was very interesting, a lot of the things that Kirby Smart said about Dominic Blaylock this week, especially potentially about Dominic Blaylock as a punt returner that's going to get a long look at Georgia once he starts in. And that's very interesting, Brandon, to have one of those guys to take your breath away, guys back there. That I think was always a chance when you put that scare factor into a special teams unit when they know that guy back there in the red and black could take that thing to the house.
Hey, good stuff, Jeff. Thanks for your time here on our program. We'll look forward to reading a bunch from you in the days ahead at DawgNation.com. We appreciate the recruiting insight when it's good news, when it's bad news, and kind of everything in between. We just like knowing the real story. So thanks for giving us the straight scoop, and we will look forward to speaking to you soon.
Yeah, Brandon, I'm sure you will either revel or make sure everybody knows how well the scorecard looked for Clemson on 5 stars after their spring game on Saturday.
Yeah, there you go. That's good stuff from Jeff Sintel. Let's roll on here.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So Jeff hates when I do this, but honesty compels me to admit, a little bit of what's the word I'm looking for here? letting us down easy maybe once again. We heard some of that on Wednesday when it comes to Miles Murphy, Brian Brzee. Certainly not the most positive appraisal of the Jermaine Burton situation. Burton's a guy that I really like. I'm influenced about Burton because Terrence Edwards really likes him a lot, and we around here like Terrence Edwards. Edwards has spoken about Burton a few times, the DawgNation video channels. Obviously, Burton's his own man. He's going to make his own decision. So, just because he's coached by Terrence Edwards doesn't mean that he's ultimately going to go to Georgia. But Jeff saying turn down some of the attention, basically dial it down a bit. Maybe foreshadowing what's going to happen on April 20th. That makes you a little nervous because I'd like to have Burton. So get kind of interesting there. I will say that it seems like it's a little bit harder to get a full read on Burton. And I'm guessing part of that's because, as it stands right now, he lives so far away. What is it, Calabasas, California? Is that where he lives right now? And he's a Georgia guy. He's been to a couple different high schools, but he's in California right now. So maybe that's part of the reason why the industry has a little bit of a difficult, task of trying to get a real strong feel for him, just because he lives right now a long way away from others. It seems like he's a little bit of a mercurial figure, if I'm using that word correctly, when it comes to this 2020 class. When on April 20th he'll make his announcement, and yeah, I'd like to have him. I mean, I think the wide receiver is a little bit for Georgia like what we said on the other side of the ball with the defensive front. Georgia's got to produce more sacks. It's got to produce more tackles for loss. It's got to show that it can get those big-time defensive front guys, defensive linemen, classic defensive ends. It's got to show that it can get those guys into the NFL as a very high draft pick. That's part of the reputational challenge that Georgia's trying to establish for itself right now. On the offensive side of the ball, it's the same thing with wide receivers and tight ends. I mean, I'll invite you to go back and check what Arik Gilbert, the five-star tight end, told Jeff Sintel when he spoke to him a couple of Sundays ago. That those intimate conversations he has with the UGA tight ends coach Todd Hartley, it's about the fact that tight ends now, according to Gilbert, relaying what he's been told from Hartley, it's going to be a bigger part of the Georgia offense right now. It is clear that everybody wants the football. Everybody wants to have that, shared and distributed, and so wide receivers are seeing that too. Now, listen, Georgia's also, facing a situation where it's trying to keep a lot of different people happy. It wants five-star running backs to feel like this is the place for running backs. It wants five-star receivers and tight ends to feel like it's the place for them as well. So these are all things being considered first-world problems. But pretty clearly, Georgia's dealing with two major behemoths in its own region. The reigning national champion Clemson, what Alabama has been as the reigning SEC champion, and knocking them off takes as much talent as you can get. So tough recruiting battles. Georgia's involved with a lot of them, but it's going to have to win them to get where it wants to go. All right, let me transition to the SEC through here for a moment, and let me remind you about one of the cool things I think about your local Atlanta Kroger right now. Around here, one of the things you hear us talk a lot about is our pride in Georgia agriculture. And one of the things in particular that comes up for that is, I'm talking about real dairy milk from Georgia cows. That is something that my family just loves. We like the real stuff, not the fake, the phony stuff, because we think that the real stuff is good for you. It's good for your teeth. It's good for your bones. It just tastes good. So I put it in my coffee every single morning. My kids go through gallons of the stuff with every meal, and I could not be happier to see them growing up healthy. And I believe that real Georgia dairy milk from Georgia cows is one of the things that's getting them there. And beyond that, my wife is a great cook. She's cooking up all kinds of stuff, and a lot of the meals that you enjoy, whether it be in your own home or restaurant, whatever else, it's that real milk that really is the ingredient in those things, ends up making it taste the way that you want it to taste. I'm talking about shrimp and grits. I'm talking about macaroni and cheese. A lot of those things, that comes from real milk. Real milk's what makes that taste good. So please check out real dairy milk from Georgia cows at your local Atlanta Kroger. All right, Jeff Sintel mentioned there are a number of SEC spring games this weekend, LSU included. I thought this might be fun. Of the 4 teams that have spring games on Saturday, I thought I might take a look at their season win totals. And maybe if you get a chance to watch some of these games on TV, you can think in this regards of just how good these teams are going to be this year. So let me start with Ole Miss. On Saturday, I believe they call it the Grove Bowl. I believe that's the name of the LSU spring game, or should I say the Ole Miss spring game. It's the Grove Bowl. Ole Miss is over-under season win total, according to BetOnline, is 6 right now. You can either bet more than 6 regular season wins or fewer than 6 regular season wins. Given the depth in the SEC West right now, Somebody's got to be bad. Somebody's got to be terrible. I'm going to go Ole Miss under the 6. I think that is the right play for the Rebels this season. Along the same lines, Arkansas also going off this weekend with its own spring game. Last year the game was in Little Rock. I think it's back in Fayetteville this year, although admittedly I don't know for sure. Their over-under total, you can bet over this, more wins or fewer wins than this, is 5.5. I said yesterday I think that Arkansas is slightly a SEC team kind of on the rise, maybe more so than the attention that it's getting. There are a few SEC teams that aren't rising quite as fast as some people might think, and they get extra attention. Arkansas, maybe the opposite of that. They don't get a ton of attention. They may be doing a little better than some realize. Maybe not quite this year. As I said before, if a lot of teams in the SEC West are going to be good, by nature, a couple of teams have to be bad. So as it stands for right now, I'm going to stay under on Arkansas. But this may be an over next year. But for now, it's still an under. I'll go under on both Ole Miss and Arkansas. And then you get to a couple more. LSU, who, as Jeff said, Jermaine Burton going to be in the building tomorrow for them. LSU's over-under total at BetOnline right now is set at 9. 9. Pretty high total for that team. And yet, I'm tempted to go over. Now, you got the tough game against Alabama. Texas A&M is going to be better. You got Florida, the crossover game from the SEC East. I'm kind of a believer right now in LSU. I am tempted to go over the 9 on LSU. And I'm curious to actually watch them that spring game tomorrow. But as it stands right now, I'm going to go over the 9 on LSU for the season. And then one more. South Carolina is at 7 right now, according to BetOnline. Once again, that's a number you can either bet to win more games than that or bet them to win fewer games than that in the regular season. As DawgNation Daily listeners and viewers have pointed out before, South Carolina this year faces a brutal schedule. The SEC East is getting better. They've got to play the out-of-conference game against Clemson every year. Their rotational crossover game in the SEC West this year is Alabama. Alabama rotates on the schedule. Their permanent crossover game is Texas A&M. So I'm a believer that Texas A&M can be a top 10 team. Alabama certainly will be a top 10 team. Clemson will certainly be a top 10 team. I think that Georgia is a given to be a top 10 team. Those are 4 really, really tough games before you get into whatever Florida is, whatever Missouri is, and whatever anybody else is. Given that schedule, I don't see how South Carolina can go over that. And what happens if they don't? Is there a possibility at the end of the 2019 season, Will Muschamp could be in trouble at another SEC school? I'm not pushing for him to get fired, but I'll be interested to see the level of patience that South Carolina fans are willing to show if this season goes badly for him with a really, really tough schedule. That's going to be a very, very interesting scenario to watch play out. As I said yesterday, I think that South Carolina was among the most disappointing SEC teams in the entire league a year ago. We'll make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, on Fridays, we kind of view this show as the kickoff to your weekend. We appreciate you spending this first day of the weekend with us on Fridays. And as a way of doing that, we also like to do our Kroger kickoff. Because let's face it, when you're kicking off the weekend, getting ready for some outdoor cookouts or parties, whatever else, we want you to be thinking about Kroger for that as well, because they are going to make that a lot more fun for you. And it's also fun to kick off the weekend on a weekend like this where Georgia has a lot going on athletically, and much of this is on campus. So let's update you on a few of these things right now. The Gym Dogs are hosting the NCAA Regionals this weekend. That's going on all weekend long there at Stegman Coliseum. After they had a pretty good showing of the SEC tournament, they will now qualify for the next level of NCAA play. That is going on inside Stegman Coliseum. A massive, massive baseball series for the Diamond Dogs starting today with Emerson Hancock on the mound for the Dogs against Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt very highly rated. This is a real measuring stick for Georgia in terms of how it maybe potentially factors into the national conversation. Vanderbilt's been there before. This is a big series for Georgia. My understanding is all 3 of these games this weekend are sold out. Really hope they get good weather for that, because I'd love to see the Diamond Dogs have a great showing there at Foley Field for that. You got softball hosting Texas A&M. Not only that, though, the track and field team is hosting the Spec Towns this weekend. Tennis is heavily involved with some good stuff. Golf's got some stuff going on. This is about as busy a weekend as you're going to get around UGA Athletics, with all the various sports kind of involved with that. And who knows, maybe in years to come, you'll have Georgia involved in the Final Four on a weekend like this. For now, though, that's not happening. But what is happening is A lot there around UGA. A lot of that this weekend centered around Athens. So best of luck to all the UGA programs as they go through that. And by the way, speaking of spring break going on right now, you can earn 4 times the fuel points right now on vacation gift cards at your local Kroger. It's a great way to save up for your vacation, whether you're got one going on this weekend at the end of spring break or one coming up this summer. Take advantage of those 4 times the fuel points savings on vacation cards there at your local Atlanta Kroger. All right, really fun show today. Love the recruiting information from Jeff Sintel. Looking forward to some SEC spring games this weekend. And, off the top of the show, I have a really good time when Dan Mullen says the things that he says. I think that he probably knows that the line he was selling yesterday is a bunch of bunk, that obviously Florida's not playing the toughest non-conference schedule in the country this year, nor do they have that scheduled in the upcoming year. But listen, you got to just say whatever you got to say to get through the day, and I guess that's what Dan Mullen is doing there. But nonetheless, that adds more fuel to the fire of the Gator-Hater rivalry and makes the world's largest outdoor cocktail party that much more fun. So for us around here, we're not a bit mad about it. It just makes, we think, Georgia want to go out there and win that game even more and keep that Gator-Hater updater number continuing to climb. In fact, it's now been 888 days since Florida's beaten Georgia. That, my friends, is good news and a great way to get the weekend started. We'll see you back here on Monday for DawgNation Daily. And on video, time to roll into our R.S. Andrews cool down, heating, air, plumbing, electric. R.S. Andrews does it all for you. So if you've got an AC that needs to be tuned up or one that just needs to be replaced, or you got an issue with your water heater, kind of anything else in between those big, major systems in your house, the stuff that goes on behind the walls, well, R.S. Andrews will take really good care of you. We trust them because they show up on time. They do the work that was promised. There's no surprises with the price. They're just good folks, and you'll like them as well. R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com. All right, there are a couple of things I'd like to try to do in addition to whatever y'all want to talk about for our R.S. Andrews cool down. I kind of want to get some thoughts from you about some sort of fun schedule-related questions. I asked Connor one of these a little earlier, and I'll get him to join us on some of these too. First of all, I'd like to hear your thoughts on, there's been the rumor out there that maybe Georgia can play Oklahoma. Mike Griffith had some reporting on that at DawgNation.com, that there actually may be other programs other than Oklahoma that Georgia's working to schedule with, more so than the Sooners. Be that as it may, Oklahoma would still be fun, and, teams other than Oklahoma might very well be fun too. So I'd love to hear from you about which teams you'd like to see Georgia play. But I also would like to hear your thoughts on this, and let me see if I can set this up kind of cleanly and neatly. So this week, we heard reports out of Kentucky basketball coach John Calipari getting a quote-unquote lifetime contract with the Kentucky Wildcats. Now, for the life of me, I don't know what that means, but that's the phrase that's been used there. So I started thinking, if Kirby Smart's going to coach all of these games that don't really start happening until, 2027 at the earliest, and then stretching on into the, the next decade of the 2030s, 2031 and whatnot, you're talking about kind of a lifetime situation for him at Georgia in order to coach all the way through these games. So what I asked Connor was, given the risk of losing Smart, either to another college job, which honestly seems unlikely, or an NFL job, would you pony up $1,000 of your own money to pay for the proverbial lifetime contract for Kirby Smart in order to keep him in Athens for the rest of his career? And I'll let Connor speak on this himself in a moment. But what Connor said is, no, not paying $1,000 for that out of my own money, because the risk of losing Kirby Smart to another college job or to an NFL job is too small right now to make that be the kind of thing that I would be worried about. For instance, if a Clemson fan were asked the same question about Dabo Swinney, my guess is in the hypothetical realm in which this question exists, Clemson fans might be a little more willing to spend $1,000 of their own money to hold on to Dabo Swinney, because there would seem to be a much greater chance that Dabo could leave for another job, his alma mater, Alabama, than Kirby Smart, who is already at his alma mater and already has, when they do the list of, best college jobs, Georgia's second, third, first on these kinds of things all the time. So the risk of losing Kirby may just be small enough that it's not worth $1,000 of your own money. Am I kind of explaining this, Connor, the way that you feel your opinion is when it comes to this?
Yeah, I just, $1,000 is a lot of money to some of us. And
well, no, I picked it because it's a lot of money to everybody.
$1,000 is definitely not a lot of money to everybody. But to some of us.
For all of us in this room.
To some of us, I don't see with the way NFL hiring trends go and the want for more offensive innovation, I don't really see an NFL team coming and trying to pluck Kirby Smart from the college ranks. I mean, when was the last time a college head coach got hired, defensive head coach, got hired to go to the NFL? You'd probably have to go back to Saban if I'm remembering correctly.
Has there not been one since Saban?
Yeah.
Which would have been after, what, the 2005 season?
So Harbaugh is an offensive guy.
Yeah.
Doug Marrone is an offensive guy. Pete Carroll was an NFL guy before going to USC, so I'm not really counting him.
I will also say that if we're talking about like 2031, assuming that we still have, football as we understand in 2031.
A planet in 2031.
Assuming there's still a planet then, trends will have also likely changed a good bit then from where they are now. So there is a lot that can change. So we'll give you a chance to talk about that too. But here's also one more thing that I wanted to ask. So what is the last year, Connor, that Georgia currently has one of these things scheduled? Is it 2031? Is it the final? Is that the latest one of these non-conference games is scheduled right now?
The second Clemson series goes 2032 and 2033.
Okay, so we're all the way to 2033. This got nothing to do with football, but I'm curious. Give me a prediction of one thing that life is like in 2033. And I mean this seriously. I want a serious prediction of something that you think we will be doing on planet Earth in 2033 that we're not doing now. Because how many years is that into the future? Is that 14 years in the future?
Yes.
So subtract 14 years from where we are right now. That's 2005. I didn't have a smartphone in 2005. I don't know. When was the iPhone invented? 2006?
2007.
Okay, so I had no smartphone. I had never heard of social media. I think there was probably MySpace in 2005.
Facebook had been invented by that point, but it had not become a global phenomenon.
I had not heard of it yet. So think about how different life would have been in 2005 to now, and that's how different life could presumably be between now and 2033. So I'd love to have your predictions on that. We can also talk about anything else you want to as well.
Facebook will no longer exist. It will shut down. Instagram will still be there, and they'll pivot to something else. But Facebook, as we know it, will not exist.
So what do all these people do with their top fan statuses?
I guess,
You got to frame that. Connor says you got no platform. So at that point in time, we'll be just doing DawgNation Daily on YouTube only.
And there'll be some new streaming platform, or, Amazon will allow us to stream right into your homes off of your Alexas or Google whatevers. Georgia will have multiple national championships by that point. Tom Brady will still be quarterbacking the Patriots.
Just since you said that, I wasn't going to say this out loud, but since you said that, Brandon Vernon says Connor's hair's going to be gone.
Oh, absolutely. Look, I know my days are numbered, so.
Pretty funny stuff.
But they'll have a better solution for hair loss by then, so I'll probably still have some form of hair.
Now, Ron Willard also has a really interesting take on the opposite of what we were saying before. When it comes to, would you pay $1,000 of your own money to ensure that Kirby Smart stays at Georgia for a lifetime in order to coach some of these games and beyond? Ron Willard goes the opposite. And I was curious to hear if somebody would say this. He says, never give lifetime contracts. A lot can change in 5 years. Now, generally speaking, Ron is correct about that. Take an athlete like Tiger Woods, for instance, just to see how much things can change over the course of a 5-year period. You go from being the greatest golfer of all time to now not being the greatest golfer to all of a sudden being kind of good again. I mean, things can change dramatically with coaches and players over the course of 5 years. Is there a reasonable reason that Kirby Smart could somehow not be the kind of coach that Georgia fans would want to keep for a lifetime 5 years from now?
Can I make a joke that's going to annoy a lot of people?
Oh, no. All right, go ahead.
He decides to keep running fake punts on 4th and long.
But, honestly, I think in this case, most people probably agree with that, that they don't want much more of what you saw at the end of that game against Alabama. Now, I don't think one bad decision is what Kirby Smart is as a coach, or even a couple of bad decisions is what Kirby Smart is as a coach. But honesty would compel you to admit, as Ron says, a lot of things can change with a lot of people over the course of 5 years. Think about what Urban Meyer was thought of 5 years ago compared to what he's thought about today. Now, I think that there are a lot of programs would still like to have Meyer as their coach, but it's not the no-brainer anymore that it was 5 years ago. 5 years ago was 2014. He was the reigning national champion in college football. 5 years later, reputationally, Meyer is nowhere near as revered as he was then. So as weird as it seems, I mean, the example that we have of other people says it's at least a possibility. Let me go over here to YouTube here for a moment. G. Grace, who's an Alabama fan, says, I can see UGA in the college football playoff win or lose the SEC championship. Yeah, I mean, it certainly could happen. I think it's easier for a program that's won the national championship in the playoff era to make the playoff as a non-conference champion. I think that, so what you saw happen in 2017, it's a lot easier to give, I think, Alabama that benefit of the doubt right now than a program like Georgia, who didn't get that same thing a year ago. That's not an apples-to-apples comparison because the two seasons weren't exactly the same. But, you know, for Georgia, if you feel really good about its playoff chances, I think it needs to win its way in more so than hoping the committee gives them that break. I mean, honestly, that's one of the reasons why, if you've noticed, you see Georgia wearing those Do More T-shirts. I think the message behind all of that is, and it's one that we've kind of adopted around here a bit too, which is you've got to leave no doubt. You've got to play well enough that the committee doesn't have a choice about whether or not to put you in the playoff. I think that's what Georgia's working on trying to do. Eric M. Rio says about, he calls him Muffin, Dan Mullen, Muffin. He's going to have to make some improvements, but to bring them to the elite status, he's going to have to win those big games. They have to be able to beat the East convincingly, which they have not done. Yeah, I mean, I think that y'all know I'm a Gator hater, but I do think that there is a bit of delusion coming from Florida that because they were given a nice ranking at the end of the year, and if you look at the rankings, they were right ahead of Georgia. I think there's an assumption that, well, therefore, if they gave us this ranking, then we must be pretty good. But there's a difference between wins on the field and rankings. Rankings, pole position, that's just something that was tossed your way by people who cast a ballot. But actual wins on the field have to be earned, and Florida didn't get nearly as many of those. Did not get nearly as many of those. So we shall see. We shall see.
Can I pitch you a hypothetical, BA?
Please.
So, there's been a lot of talk about Brian Brzee, Miles Murphy, the Clemson threat. Right now, today, I can give you a choice of picking one of those two to commit to Georgia, but you don't get the other.
Okay.
And you get at least one of them. Or you choose to write out their commitments, and you could possibly get both or neither. Which scenario do you choose? And is there, if you pick the former option, which recruit would you pick?
Okay, that's a really good question. Really good question. So let me start with the easiest one to answer. If you told me I could have one now, meaning I wouldn't get the other, based on some of the circumstantial stuff that Jeff Sintel's been tossing out, I'd be a fool not to take that deal because as it stands right now, Georgia doesn't appear to be the point spread favorite for either of them and seems to be a distinct underdog to both of them. So if I could have one of them now to guarantee an elite defensive lineman like this, I would definitely take that deal. As far as which one I want, it's a conflict because Brzee's obviously the higher rated player, and a lot of people have just raved about him, and yet Murphy, only slightly lower rated, is also an in-state guy. Symbolically, I'm tempted to take Murphy because if you've got a player this good in your own state, Powder Springs is a very, very talent-rich area, especially in the last few years, where Hillgrove is and where McEachern is. That's a very talent-rich area. I guess I'm tempted to go with the lower-rated recruit Murphy on this.
I'm a little surprised there. I thought you would go almost. I mean, I would pick Brzee more because I think I know what Brzee's going to be in the Georgia defense and in college. Whereas,
and that may be the right answer. I mean, I'm wrestling with this question for the first time. Your point of, hey, Brzee is just a better fit for the Georgia offense, that may be the right answer. You may be right, and if I thought about this for 10 more minutes, I may come to your conclusion.
And, I mean, I think Georgia recruiting state of Georgia, knows, like most well-known fans, knows you can't win every battle. You're not going to get every top 5 player in the state. It's just hard to do, especially with, the proximity Clemson has to the Atlanta area, Alabama, Auburn, etc. But, Georgia's still doing very well with Arik Gilbert. There are a number of other Atlanta area prospects, even in Powder Springs, Jamil Burroughs, who's at McEachern right now. So, while I have brought up that Kirby hasn't landed the number one player in the state, Miles Murphy could end up being that by the time the recruiting thing is all said and done. I think you have to go Brzee just because I feel like Brzee is a little bit more of a known quantity at this point.
I think when you factor in how he defended the Georgia defense, I think that may be true. Changing the subject just slightly, Grun D on YouTube says, I think the Vols are going to emerge a little this year. They have some players now. I think that Tennessee could be a real threat to Georgia, or a more significant threat to Georgia is probably the better way to say that. Probably 2020, 2021. I've said this before, that if you say the next team other than Georgia to win the SEC East, if I'm betting on any of those teams right now, Tennessee is my answer far more than Florida is, even though Florida would seem to have the better head start because they're going to be a preseason top 10 team this year, and Tennessee hasn't been to bowls in the last couple of years. I think that Tennessee is a much more likely team to one day emerge in a year in which Georgia doesn't win the East, more so than Florida, because I think that Tennessee has some honest-to-goodness momentum on the recruiting trail in a way that I just don't see taking place at Florida. Now, Tennessee's still got to figure some things out. I don't know that they've got that big-time quarterback in place, either on the roster now or coming in with the class of 2020. I don't know that I love their future at quarterback as it stands right now. But, I mean, could Tennessee be a top 15 team in 2020? I think they probably could. I think that 2019 is still way too early for that. But could I see them 13th, 14th in the country in 2020 with the recruiting work that Jeremy Pruitt's done, maybe slightly even better than that? I'd be surprised if they're not ranked in the top 25, and I think there's a chance they're even higher than that 2 seasons from now.
I think if Tennessee could switch the Georgia game to be at home in 2020 instead of having it home in 2019, I think they would take that because I think that could be potentially a very big statement game for the Vols, given it's late in the season, so the SEC, that in that year, because that'll be the first year the Auburn and Tennessee game will have switched. It could be a late SEC East, potential division winner game. And Georgia, while you would imagine the quarterback situation is at least answered by that point in the season, that 2020 year, Georgia could be starting in someone other than Jake Fromm. Yeah, that's potentially true. What Tennessee could remind me of in a couple of years, as I said, this year, it's just not quite there yet. I mean, there's a chance, I would think they may start 2 freshman offensive tackles. That's a dangerous situation. I don't know how I feel about their quarterback situation. So 2019 is just too early. But if you look at 2020, there's a chance Tennessee could be then what Georgia was back in the 90s, where Georgia was, in some years, pretty good, but in those years not beating Florida, not beating Tennessee. Goff had one of those teams in 92 that beat everybody but Tennessee and Florida. Donnan had one of those teams in actually 97. They did beat Florida, didn't beat Tennessee that year, also lost to Auburn. There was those 90s Georgia teams that were beating everybody but the 2 toughest teams on the schedule. I mean, could I see 2020 Tennessee going 10-2, losing only to Alabama and Georgia? There's a really good chance that happens. I don't know about really good chance. I think you're maybe putting the cart before the horse there. They have to show, they finished this season horrendously, getting blown out by Vanderbilt and Missouri. I get that they beat Kentucky. I get that they beat Auburn. But, the end of the season run where they had a chance, all they had to do was beat one of those 2 teams, and they would have gone to a bowl game. And to just get obliterated by both, I think is giving me a little pause here. Let me also correct myself on one thing before I say 10-2 for Tennessee in 2020. They play at Oklahoma week 2, so I'll slow down on that. But let's say 9-3. I feel pretty confident saying. So you're saying they're beating Florida for sure in 20. Here's what I'll say. Here's what I'll say. In 2020, Tennessee will not be an underdog to anyone but the 3 teams we just mentioned: at Oklahoma, Alabama, which is a home game that year, and at Georgia. Tennessee's a favorite in the other 9 games. I don't care how bad Missouri beat them this year. 2 years from now, Tennessee's favorite in that game. I don't care what happens between Tennessee and Florida this year, where Florida on paper is much better. Tennessee is a favorite in that game in 2020. I feel pretty confident in saying that. Even at Arkansas, which I've said before, maybe by 2020, maybe a slightly dangerous game, shades of Clint Sterner for Tennessee fans. I think
I'll take Tennessee as a favorite on the road against Arkansas in 2020 as well. I feel pretty confident saying that. Changing the subject, Justin Dowell says about Myles Murphy, also Zykevious Walker can fit an outside linebacker in our system. I don't know so much about the position fit for him, but I do know that is a player. When you think about those in-state guys Georgia can win with, Walker from, I believe it's Sly County, I think I'm pronouncing that correct. Walker's one of those guys they can win with. By the way, Hugh Nash says, don't discount Eddie Gran's impact on Kentucky. You are so right, Hugh. The great Eddie Gran. You never know what he might be able to do. John Chappell also says, you're figuring Saban's still around in 2020. John, who is a top fan by virtue of good comments like that, is exactly right. It is not a given that Nick Saban's still coaching Alabama in 2020 when they travel to Knoxville there. That's a very good point. But they'll still have pretty good talent no matter who the coach is. Gerald Harmon says when Harrison Bailey gets to Tennessee, they're going to win 10 games every year. I will be curious to see how good Harrison Bailey ends up being. And, if Tennessee continues to be the right place, the right fit for him.
I find it interesting that, talking with Jeff and some other stuff behind the scenes, Jim Chaney wasn't a super huge fan of Harrison Bailey at Tennessee, and now Jim Chaney is the offensive coordinator there at Tennessee. And he's made it pretty clear he wants to target those programs those high school programs, especially in the state of Georgia, that produce a lot of high end talent. They've gone after guys from Colquitt County, Marietta, Grayson, just to name a few of those programs, and it's clear they want to build pipelines from there to Tennessee. And I do think it's interesting to see, how maybe things shake out there. Say they don't end up getting a Reed Gilbert, and they don't end up getting B.J. Ojulari, who, have both mentioned Tennessee is probably their number 2 team right now. I wonder, maybe what happens with Bailey there if, they strike out on a couple of these Marietta kids.
I think it's a very fair question to ask. Just even publicly. Not even using inside information. You just look at the public track record of Georgia. You didn't see a lot of public overtures Bailey's way when it came to UGA. So, there's not a whole lot of reading between the lines you have to do on that. Spencer Moore also says when it comes to Tennessee, he says he could see them going 9 wins this year. I think the problem for Tennessee this year is a little bit like the problem for South Carolina. When you've got Alabama from the West adding to Georgia in the East, that's already a pretty tough schedule before you get to anything else. And while I'll tell you that by 2020 I'll take Tennessee over Missouri, in 2019 having to go to Missouri in late November, that's a tough game for Tennessee. They did get blown out a year ago, and being on the road for that game this year is really pretty tough. At Kentucky, I have no idea how good they'll be. My assumption is not very. Mississippi State comes to Neyland this year. I'm not nearly as high on Mississippi State, minus the 2 big defensive linemen. It's BYU, it's Georgia State, it's Chattanooga with the non-conference. So 9 still seems like a lot, but that's not an impossible schedule. That's not an impossible schedule. The problem for Tennessee with Mississippi State is it's the week in between Georgia and Alabama, so that kind of gets even tougher. They'll probably be pretty beaten up after Mississippi State, and maybe a little bit of a, I don't want to say look ahead because Tennessee can't be looking past anybody, but playing that game as a sandwich between the 2 big SEC behemoths makes that tough. And then if you're a Tennessee fan and you have a stretch of Georgia, Alabama in 2 of 3 weeks, a game that you ought to be a very heavy favorite and ought to be able to win easily, when you play South Carolina the week after having played Alabama, and 2 weeks prior to that you play Georgia, all of a sudden you're not as healthy and fresh for that South Carolina game. I think South Carolina for Tennessee on October 26th is more dangerous given the fact that it's 3 straight SEC games before that. Georgia, Mississippi State, which may or may not be a challenge, at Alabama. That physically takes a lot out of you. Tennessee could be more trouble against South Carolina than they probably should be, just given what they will have given up over the 3 weeks prior to that. So watch out for that. That's one of the reasons why, even with a fairly manageable schedule, I think 9 wins would be hard for Tennessee to get to this year.
So you're talking yourself out of them.
No. That's 2019. I'm saying 2020. 2019 is its own monster. And 2019, I I don't think Tennessee's. I think they're barely scratching bowl eligibility. In 2020, I think there's a really good chance it's a top 15 team and a point spread favorite in at least 9 games.
Seems like a big jump.
But we've seen big jumps.
Not that big.
Georgia going from 8-5 in 2016 to the College Football Playoff in 2017.
That's a lot bigger than going from a team that's not going to make a bowl to a team that's a top 15 team.
Oh, I think they'll probably make a bowl this year. That's an easy schedule. Finding 7 wins to make a bowl or 6 wins to make a bowl. I mean, you start off with 3. Tennessee doesn't play anybody until they go to Florida. Georgia State, BYU, Chattanooga. I'm assuming BYU is not going to be very good this year. So they're 3-0 going to Florida. Then it gets a little bit tough, but you got to find 3 or 4 wins out of Florida, Georgia, Mississippi State, Alabama, South Carolina. You got UAB. How do they play this schedule? This is like a Sun Belt schedule. They play UAB. They're at Kentucky, at Missouri, Vanderbilt. That team's won 7 games. That's a 7-game. That's a schedule built for 7 wins.
Would you like to put a bet on it? Would you like to wager on this? You do owe me for Walter Grant was at running back yesterday.
Was he really?
You were wrong there.
So I owe you 75 cents for that.
You owe me $2.
No. I said yesterday. No, you can check the tape.
No.
I said yesterday.
I know what you said. I didn't accept it.
I said yesterday I was hedging it down to 75 cents. I'll go $2 on Tennessee winning 7 games this year.
$2. Nothing.
Listen, I'm not a man of means. I'm not a man of means. Not a man of means.
And DawgNation viewers and listeners, you can hold me accountable to this.
Yeah. Daniel Moore says Tennessee's going to win at least 7 games. Take the bet. I don't think they win it easy. I think they probably get 7. I think they probably get 7.
$100. Tennessee does not win 7 games in the regular season.
Oh my gosh. You know, if we were governed by FCC restrictions, you wouldn't even be able to do that.
Are we governed by FCC restrictions?
I don't think so. I mean, the regular broadcast would be because we're on the radio at noon, but this is the freewheeling world of the wild internet here. So, I mean, there are places you can go to put that money down if you want to.
I know. I might just have to go do that, but I don't think the over under is it 7?
I think it is 7 actually.
Oh well, might have
no.
I feel like it's 6.5. Which I mean, if it's still 6.5, I would feel good about.
Ooh, this is actually a really strong take from Brian Kephart. He says, hot take, UAB beats Tennessee. Is it Bill Clark? Is he still the coach there?
Yes.
They had like 50-something sacks a year ago. Bill Clark is a really, really good coach. The reason why I asked is because if he's at UAB now, he's not going to be there for long. Clark was the guy that was there before they shut down the program, like when Jake Gaines is still there. Hung with them after the program shut down, or resurrected the program, or I guess resurrected doesn't need a re. That's implied. Resurrected the program. Bill Clark's a really good coach. That's a really good hot take, Brian. A really good hot take. And as Chime Dog says, that would be hot. It would certainly be fun if that were to indeed go down. To finish off this portion of the conversation, by the way, Daniel Moore, interested in taking your action. Tennessee is not the easiest under in the SEC, not even close. I mean, you're very, very confident. It's nowhere near the easiest under.
Are you going to say Florida?
No, well, I mean, I think that Florida is a potential under candidate, but if you're asking me my honest opinion, they're easier unders than that. I gave you one on the show a little earlier. South Carolina under 7, I think, is easier than that.
Let me pull up their schedule.
I mean, I'm giving you 4 losses to begin. A&M, Georgia, Alabama, Clemson. They start at 4.
Have to go to Missouri.
That's a hard game. Remember, Missouri's got like the sword of Damocles hanging over their head with these NCAA sanctions. They're going to play every game like it's a Super Bowl this year. We got Kelly Bryant. At Missouri is really, really tough for South Carolina. That's an easy.
Yeah,
under.
you're probably be smart.
Under.
I don't know about easy, but I can see a path to 7. I wouldn't go easy, but I will say I feel more comfortable taking the under than the over. Far more comfortable than taking the under.
Brian McPhail says Pruitt will be on the hot seat if UAB beats them. I do think Brian brings up an interesting point that, we made the comparison between Tennessee and Georgia before, and a lot of people will do that because Pruitt is a little bit like Smart. But as I said yesterday, and I can't remember if I said this on the video or if part of the regular broadcast, Kirby, when he built up Georgia, did so in a time when there was no other Georgia in the SEC East. The SEC East had been ripe for the taking for like 4 years. Florida had won it 2 years in a row. Missouri had won it the 2 years before that. I mean, if Georgia had had its shoes on the right feet, it could have won the East in like 3 of those 4 years. It just was, frankly, it was just giving away seasons. And then Kirby says, all right, we're going to stop doing all this kind of stuff. And in 2017, a new sheriff was in town. Well, that makes the job of Jeremy Pruitt now a lot harder. He's got a permanent rival in Alabama that's obviously not showing signs of slowing down. He's got a Georgia in the East that's more dominant than anyone has been since Danny Werfel was quarterbacking Florida. This is a really, really difficult in-division opponent. So what are Tennessee fans going to do if this year isn't 7 wins or if it's only 7 wins? As Brian said, what if there is an upset loss in there? What if there's another one of these ugly games against teams that Tennessee fans think they should be beating, like a Missouri or like a whomever? I think the recruiting work that Jeremy Pruitt does proves the program's on the rise. But sometimes rank-and-file fans don't buy into that as much. Sometimes rank-and-file fans allow the emotion of a loss to distract them from the other evidence for the program. I think had Kirby not done well in 2017 on the field, a lot of Georgia fans would have gotten very impatient with him, and I think it would have been a mistake then too because Kirby was building the program behind the scenes. For better or for worse, Pruitt's doing some of that. But I have to admit it would be very interesting to see if Tennessee fans will allow him some room to also figure some things out on the field too. How impatient will they be if this is another ugly season in Knoxville? I think that could be very interesting to see.
So I get where your optimism is coming from, but shouldn't it at least be somewhat concerning that a team that missed a bowl game in 2017, which was just a disaster year, the end of the Butch Jones era, everything, a team that all they had to do was win one of their last 2 games against Vanderbilt, Missouri, 2 teams that are good, but I think if you actually look at the recruiting numbers over the years, Tennessee had actually recruited better than both of them, so theoretically they should have more talent.
Yeah, probably.
And they were non-competitive in both. Doesn't that say at least a little something about Jeremy Pruitt and that staff, where they beat Kentucky, they think the season's over, and they miss out on a bowl opportunity? And I think you and I would both agree, Georgia going and having that Liberty Bowl and beating TCU that year, I think
that helped.
That helped a lot going into the next season.
It helped, and I think it gave you a positive vibe to finish the year. This is what I can say in response to that. When true change happens in college football, it seems to almost always happen fast. The only example I can think of right now of really positive change happening slowly is what Dabo Swinney has done at Clemson, where they did work their way up to being as good as they are now, and having really good quarterbacks has helped that transition. But they are the example of you just got to bide your time and wait, bide your time and wait, bide your time and wait. Most of the other programs who have gotten really good, and listen, because of how good Georgia is right now, I'm not telling you Tennessee's going to be an SEC championship contender anytime soon. But being, justifiably ranked in the top 10, top 15, if we call that a positive improvement of where they are now, if it does happen, it's likely to happen fast because that's the way that most change seems to happen in college football. And I won't fully be able to understand why that is. It could be if you've ever read like a Malcolm Gladwell book like Tipping Point, where you may need a certain percentage of your roster to be athletically gifted enough and mentally bought in enough to get the other guys to do what they're supposed to do. And so for a really bad performance like Tennessee had against Missouri and Vanderbilt, it could just be that roster hasn't yet reached the tipping point of there's still enough dead weight, there's still enough guys who miss, Butch, there's still enough going on there that you just can't quite get the oars to row in the same direction. I honestly don't know, but Mike Johnson's told us the story about behind the scenes at Alabama and how quickly all that kind of stuff changed, and we've seen our own example of that with Georgia. Really, even Mark Richt. Go back and look at his 2001 to his 2002. When change happens for the better in college football, it usually happens quickly. We are very, very late. You got a prediction for something that life's going to be like in 2033?
I think Florida still won't play a game outside of a non-conference game outside of the state of Florida.
That's a good prediction.
Do you want to know the last time Florida played a true non-conference road game?
Wasn't Michigan a couple of years ago because that was in Texas.
Yep.
A true non-conference road game, not in Tallahassee.
Not in Tallahassee. Not in the state of Florida.
Let me see if I can think about this. Gosh, there's nothing coming to mind. How long has it been?
Last year was 1991.
Wow. Who was it
not
against?
Alive.
You were not alive in 1991.
I was not alive again.
Who was it against?
It was against Syracuse.
Wow, that's amazing.
They lost that. They lost the Michigan game 33-17.
Yep.
They lost to Syracuse 38-21. Florida has not won a non-conference game outside of the state of Florida dating back to 1989 when they beat Memphis. Put that in I'm blanking on the word I want to use. But to put that in perspective, Steve Spurrier was not yet the coach at Florida the last time they won a non-conference game outside of the state of Florida.
That's amazing. That's amazing. A really good stat. Teresa Stewart checking in today. Teresa, always good to see you on the program. Somebody in the comment section earlier said flying cars. Do you think we're really going to have flying cars one day?
No.
I don't think we will either.
I believe the technology already probably exists for flying cars, but Big Auto and Big Oil don't want it to and Big Air don't want it to happen because it's going to, drastically upset the apple cart when it comes to the economic situation.
Plus, I don't think I want flying cars. I see the way that some of y'all drive on the ground.
Imagine like one of those things just like failing and dropping out of the sky, knocking out like 3 other flying cars and the people on the ground. Just wildly unsafe.
Like you see like Back to the Future 2. Like that seems really stressful to me.
Mm-hmm.
Really stressful. Plus, if we had flying cars, you give it 5 minutes and all of a sudden Atlanta's just like stacks on stacks on stacks on stacks of flying cars. We're not going to be able to get around there either. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, do you think we still have televisions in our home in 2033, or are we watching games on like air basically?
Yes, we will still have televisions.
We
Big
still
cable, still,
We still carrying smartphones?
Yes.
I kind of wonder that. I almost wonder if one day, like all devices just be the same device, right? And like your phone acts as a projector, and instead of like, well, I'm going to watch this on my phone, or I'm going to watch this on the TV screen, it's just all just kind of one thing. Some of y'all are making this political. That's not what we wanted to do. Jimmy Hoskins says Florida beat Michigan in their last bowl game, but what Connor was talking about is a true non-conference road game during the season. Now, Matt Rukavina asked a good one. He says, what about virtual reality? You think virtual reality is a true reality? Then I know there's a lot of VR stuff now, but actual real-life virtual reality.
I probably think we're a little bit further along. I will say, however, if robots become more and more prevalent in society, I will do all I can in my power to fight them.
Yeah, y'all, I'm worried about these robots.
Yeah. I've seen the Terminator movies many a time.
But you see these like viral videos now of these robots that are out there. Some of them make me a little nervous. I'm a little worried about that. We may have to rise up against them before it's all said and done. Mm-hmm. Also, in the virtual reality thing, I know I sound like an Amish person, but much the same way I'm kind of anti-flying cars, I think I'm sort of anti-prevalence of virtual reality too, because once again, I mean, I'm already worried about my kids spending too much time with technology. I mean, if they literally can transport themselves to another world, I'll never get them back.
Yep.
I'm never going to get them back. So, I don't know. James Bryant, though, says virtual reality would be cool. Chad Thomas Black says screens will be holograms like Wall-E. I could definitely see that happen. I could
certainly see it happening. I just don't know if everyone's going to have that technology by that point.
Jeff Boyle says by 2033, Georgia will be selling alcohol in the stadium in the future. So I've told you all my theory on this before. Even if Georgia did sell alcohol in the stadiums, the corridors are too small to get to it anyway, so you're not going to be able to buy it. But
I have another take.
Please.
Marijuana will still not be legal in the state of Georgia in 2033.
I could see that, and we'll still be having the random occurrence of less than an ounce in quotation marks. Alex Dean says, what about robot recruits? Yeah, maybe that's the deal. Maybe instead of like taking out the special teams part of the game, because we've always heard that maybe one day there'll be no.
You send robots out there for special teams.
You have robot special teams guys. So like, there's no more fair catching on punts. You just have robots. Y'all know that I'm 1,000 years old. I like the Twilight Zone. There's an episode of the Twilight Zone where boxing has been banned, and now boxing takes place with robots. It's actually a really good one. I could see maybe one day the special teams being done by robots. All right, we got to go. We have got to go. Jacob McMillan said he already said robot players. Yeah, so I could see that one day in the future. Also, you get those like BattleBot things now, so maybe we'll get there at some point in time. If that is the case, Georgia will be leading the way in the recruiting of the best scientists to build said robots. Wouldn't that be funny if all of a sudden the recruiting wars are not for like the 5-star athlete, but the 5-star mind of, this guy was coding when he was 4 years old. That would be all right, so the line of the day goes to Kelly Burnett, and then we'll finish off the week this way. He says, this whole conversation sounds like a Mike Leach press conference. Kelly, that is really funny and really well done. All right, good stuff. So we are going to be in Athens tomorrow for Georgia practice, at least hope to be. That should be a good deal. Jeff's got some recruiting stuff coming for you in the days ahead, too. We are going to get ready to roll into a weekend here. For those of you who've been on spring break this week, I hope it's been a good one. And we'll look forward to seeing you back here Monday at 10 a.m. Huge thanks to R.S. Andrews for bringing the program to you. Our R.S. Andrews cool down, heating, air, plumbing, electrical. The ones we trust to play all the positions around DawgNation are our friends at R.S. Andrews. So give Dari and his friends, his team, a call there at R.S. Andrews. Online, you can find them at rsandrews.com. Have a great day. We'll look forward to seeing you then.